sedentary, that's not the cause of the adipose tissue growing. That's the effect of them starving. So you have to think that an obese person is a starving person. Obese patients, we have a whole clinic at the Brody School of Medicine. We're one of the obesity centers in the East Coast of the United States, okay? Treat a lot of obesity patients. Obesity patients are starving. Why? Because they're hyperinsulinemic. That's the fancy term, meaning they have high insulin levels in their blood. When their insulin levels are high in the blood, no nutrients can ever come out of the adipose tissue. They're locked there. Your body experiences starvation, and it tells you to eat a lot, and I don't want to exercise. It tells you to slow down. You eat again, and you slow down, and if you eat another carb meal, what do? You go right around this vicious cycle. All right? And every time you go around it, what is happening? You get the middle age creep. And that's what's happening. That is why you get fat. That is why you gain weight. That's why you become obese. Right. One more. Let me draw the adipose tissue again. This is the adipose. You know what's inside it is the fat. And now, here's your meal. But this time, you're going to be on the Dudek diet plan, and what are you going to eat? Low carb, fat, and protein. What's going to happen now is some will go and be metabolized right away. About 30% and 70% comes here. Some of these nutrients, all right, you're still eating a little bit of carbs, so some of these are going to go into your adipose tissue, these nutrients, okay? And here is the rest of your body, your muscle, brain, etc. But now, when your insulin levels are low, the fat can come out of your adipose tissue. And it comes out as free fatty acids. And your muscle and your brain and the rest of the tissues in your body will use the free fatty acids for their nutrients. When that happens, your body now senses the fed state. It doesn't sense that you're starving. It senses I'm fed because it's getting all of these nutrients out of the adipose tissue because your insulin levels are low. If you spike them, it stays there. The only thing you can do is keep these down, and then it flows out. So on the Dudek diet plan, as you get into about the second week and you start getting your insulin levels down, okay, then what you see is the free fatty acid just start coming out of your adipose tissue. You're burning it all the time, okay, which is what you're supposed to do. That's the natural state of the situation. The natural physiological state is you are supposed to be using your fat all the time to bridge the gap between your meals. Because we're not grazers like cattle. We have to have nutrients, a steady supply of nutrients. And your adipose tissue is there just for that, to kind of like steady it all out as far as the calories you need to burn. So when your insulin levels are low, you can do this. Okay? Now you're in the fed state, and what do you experience? You experience something called satiety. And you eat less. You're not hungry. And now you get a lot of activity. Your body isn't telling you, your brain isn't telling you, slow down, sit down. In fact, you get energy. So here, on this plan, you start getting more active, You're not as hungry as much because you're feeding all of these tissues. And then you come, you eat again, another low-carb meal, and you cycle this way. Every time you cycle this way, what you're doing is you're taking everything out of this fat, the adipose tissue, and using it for your metabolism. So those are the two physiological conditions that you have. The high carb one, which gets you into this vicious cycle of taking 70%, about 70%, 60% of what you eat and locking it into your fat tissue, your adipose tissue, and it's never going to come out until your insulin levels are low. The other situation is a low-carb diet, which keeps your insulin levels low, and now you have this whole process here where you're using your fat all the time to metabolize it, even when you're sleeping. Okay. All right, so any questions? Yes?
What kind of numbers do you consider high insulin and low insulin?
Well, if you take an obese person who is, it's called syndrome X, metabolic syndrome X. If you take an overweight person who's moving into obesity and is going to become type 2 diabetic, there, I mean, if you have, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but basically you're talking about a normal insulin level, and these people have huge, way spiked hyper all the time, you see. I mean, it's not this, I mean, it's that. And that is one of the ways that you diagnose somebody that they're on their way to type 2 diabetes. The key is when they do the blood work, they see hyperinsulinemia, then they know you're going to be insulin dependent, or you're going to be on some kind of medication. So they become hyperinsulinemic. And now what we're talking about here is obviously if you're way, way obese, then your insulin levels are going to come way, way down. You want to normalize that. I don't know if you'll be able to do it in 2 weeks. You might have to recycle back around. But what we're talking about for most people here, I mean, you have normal levels when you eat, and if you keep a high carb diet, you're going to be spiking them up here, okay? The obese is way up here, and what we're doing is we're just keeping them right here. You're always going to have a basal level. But when you get into when you get into this cycle, okay, you are on your way for your insulin levels to continue to rise, because you're spiking it all the time with carbohydrates. And if you look in the last, the year you want to remember is 1977. This is the year that Senator George McGovern from Minnesota started this big conference, nutrition conference, in Washington, D.C. They had everybody testify about diets and everything. And this is when, you remember the food pyramid? The food pyramid prior to 1977 was, our main diet was meat, eggs, fats, proteins, etc. And carbohydrates were way up here, very little. 1977, they turned it upside down. And now they recommended that most of your calories should come from carbohydrates and very, very little fats. Okay? And this had all to do with the heart problems and cholesterol and all that kind of business. Once they turned that pyramid upside down and they told you eggs were bad for you, that bacon was bad for you, red meat was bad for you, and everybody, now everything was low fat. You go to the grocery store, everything was low fat. If you have low fat, if you're eating a low fat diet, you only have 3 nutrients. If you're eating low fat, where are the rest of the calories going to come from? Either carbs or proteins. And where do you think most of the calories in the American diet came from? Carbs. So from 1977, our diet of calories just skyrocketed for carbohydrates, and fats and proteins came down. When we did that, that's when obesity tracked right along with it. Type 2 diabetes, heart attacks, atherosclerosis, the whole works.